In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this cool looking web/product style animation that I've been seeing absolutely everywhere at the moment. And there's a few cool techniques that I want to share with you that we're going to cover. So first, I'll show you how to set everything up in Illustrator before we dive into After Effects. We'll then look at splitting out our layers so we can animate each part individually before adding a camera and 3D layers to our scene. This means that we can then add parallax and some extra flair to the look of our project. We're then going to finish it off by adding some extra effects to really make this animation look the part. So let's get to it. So first of all, in Illustrator, I have this artwork here, and you can find a link to this in the description if you want to follow along with my exact project files. I will leave those for you. What I've done with this Illustrator is this is all split out into separate layers, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But we have a background here with a simple gradient on, and then I've just created some boxes here. And then all I've done is I've screenshotted or print screened the YouTube homepage, and I split that out into two sections. So we have the trending page here, and then I've done this kind of navigation to the side as well. And then we also have some headline text and like a subheader as such. So what I've done is I've split these into individual layers so we can animate each part in After Effects and everything's separate for us ready. So if we hop into After Effects, you'll see here that I have imported everything. So we're going to skip all that. And I've also converted my Illustrator layers to text. So I've done that using the Overlord plugin, which is a paid plugin. But if not, you will need to retype that, as you can't actually convert Illustrator text to live text. You do have to retype it, unfortunately. So in mine, I'm just going to delete those original layers, and now we have all of this. So the first thing that we need to do is actually split out this composition so we can animate each part separately. And if you're following along and using my project files, you will need to do this too. But if you're using your own, you may have already taken care of that in Illustrator or Photoshop. So all I want to do is mask out each section of this main page and this navigation bar so that we can animate each part separately. So to do this, we would simply select our navigation bar layer, and then I'm going to go up to my shape tools here. I'm going to select the rectangle tool. And we just need to think about what we want to separate. So for me, I want to separate all of these sections here into one piece. And in the main page, I'm probably going to separate this into sections too. So I'll just start by selecting my shape layer. And with this navbar layer selected, I'm just going to draw over the section that I want to keep. And then we're just going to duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl and D. And then what we just need to do is set this original one to none, just so we can see everything on the navbar that's left. And that way, on my duplicate one, I can press M on my keyboard to bring up my mask paths. And I can select my mask path. And if I press V to switch to my selection tool, I can just select all these boxes and drag this down. Now we will just need to resize these masks individually to each section. We just want to make sure that these buttons are covered. So I'll just duplicate that again, press M on my keyboard, and do the mask for that as well. We can just keep doing this until we've done the whole nav bar. Now, I have made one earlier, which does save a bit of time, so I didn't want to extend this video of just me doing masks. But I will show you for this side as well exactly how I've done that. And you can see I've gone ahead and split everything out. So I've colored these layers as well. And if you want to change the color of your layers, so back here they're all the same in this comp. Say I wanted all my nav bars to be the same, I can simply select them by clicking the top one and then holding Shift and selecting the bottom one. And then we can just press this color button here, and that'll allow us to change the color of the layers. And it just makes things a bit easier to visually see, and it's kind of how I group things together without pre-comps. So you can see here, this is just my nav bar, and that's all split out. And I've simply just masked each section out as I need to. And you can see here, every single section, every single button has its own section. I've also created a base for this navbar, which is just a shape, a fill layer, and that is then alpha mattered to my main box down here. So I'll just undo that so I can share with you exactly how I've done it. So I've got this base shape here that's just a shape layer, and all I want to do is alpha mat that down to my main box and turn my main box back on. And that way, that means that this square shape will fit nicely into that main box. So if I unmap that, you can see it's just a square, and all I've done is colored it the same as this background. So I've also separated my main page as well, and you can see here I've grouped the search bar, and actually I would like to group this microphone with it as well. So I'll just open this mask and go down to my mask path, and I'll just select these two and drag that over. I'll press M to close that, and then you can see I no longer need that one, so we'll delete that one, and everything else is just grouped bit by bit. And I've just grouped the videos together, grouped the titles together. And you can do that as much as you like. You can either separate each video if you want to. It really depends on what you want to do. But for ease in this one, I've just kept it as sections. Now, if you'd not only like to master the fundamentals of After Effects, but fully understand what you're doing, and also make stunning projects that you're proud of, you can check out my Motion Essentials course, where I'll help you master After Effects from the very basics. And you'll also have access to me and other motion designers through the private community. If you need any help or any questions relating to After Effects, you'll always have lifetime access to that as well. And you can check that out using the link in the description below. Now, back to the video. So the first thing I want to look at doing here is actually animating all of these boxes. And there's a really fast way we can do this. We don't necessarily need to go through this one by one. So what I'm going to do is select all of my nav bars by again selecting the bottom one and then holding Shift and selecting the top one. And I'm just going to Control, Alt and Home, and that'll center my anchor point to each section. And you can see my anchor point's now moved. I'm then going to press P on my keyboard to bring up the position, and I'm also going to do Shift and S as well. And what I'm going to do is create keyframes for all of these just by selecting this stopwatch here and dragging up. And now we have a keyframe on every single one. Now this is actually my end position, so I'm going to select all of these and just bring it over to about 1 second. And then at the start here, I'm just going to hold Shift and press my down arrow a few times. And then we're just going to increase the scale to about 125%. And then I'm going to select all of these keyframes, press F9, and I'm going to go into a graph editor. On the speed graph here, I'm just going to extend this end one just by selecting all of those and dragging that Bezier out. I'm going to select the start one and just drag that Bezier over. And that's done that for all our keyframes now. So if we hit play, we have that kind of movement. Now it looks really weird at the minute, doesn't look amazing. And you can see this navigation bar on the right that I've actually split out is doing that as well. And I don't want that, so I've mistakenly chose it. So what I'm going to do is delete this first scale keyframe, because I don't want that no more. And instead on the position, I'm just going to bring this down all the way off my comp, because I want that to slide up kind of into position like that. I think that looks way nicer. And I'm just going to go ahead and check out my easing again, make sure it's still the same, and that's all okay. There's a really fast way that we can actually offset all of these layers and make them look way nicer than coming all on at once. So what I'm going to do is go to my nav bar here and again select the top one holding Shift, so we select them all. I'm going to move forward 1 frame with Control and right arrow, and then I'm going to do Alt and right square bracket. That's Option on Mac, and then right square bracket. And that's trimmed our layer so it's 2 frames long. So what I'm going to do is then go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and Sequence Layers. And by doing this, it will actually set our keyframes, set our layers 2 frames apart. And you can see they all cut off, which is not what we want, but they're all offset now, which creates a way nicer animation. And all we need to do is just simply drag the end of these layers back out. And if we hit play, we have this really nice offset look. Now, I don't really want these boxes kind of popping out of the side here, and that's just because of the way I've split it. And also, I think this nav bar comes on a bit late, so I'm just going to bring this nav bar forward, back to the start, and now we have this kind of thing, and I much prefer that. And then I'm going to select all of these nav bar boxes, and I'm just going to pick whip this to the nav bar base. And by doing that, on the alpha map, make sure you to pick whip that on the matte section, not the parent and link. And if you can't see the matte section like me, you can press the toggle switches and modes button down here. You might be on this mode, and just by pressing this button, it will switch to your alpha map. You can also press F4 as well, and that will just switch between the 2 modes. And now if I hit play, everything kind of sits inside the box and looks much nicer. So we're going to do the exact same for the other side now. So we're just going to go ahead and select all the main pages here. And again, I'm going to do Control, Alt, and Home to center everything. I'm going to do P on my keyboard and then hold Shift and press S. And then we're just going to click and hold and drag up all these stopwatches here to create keyframes. Move that over to about a second. And again, I'm going to scale those to 125 at the start. And just bring these down a touch. 125 might be a bit much here, but we can assess that after. And you can see I've kind of got some duping on here. So there's clearly an error somewhere in my masking. So we'll figure that out in just a moment. So again, I'm just going to select all these keyframes, press F9, go to my graph editor. I'm going to do the exact same easing. So I'm going to select all of those, push it to the start, and push all these ones at the end. So let's find out exactly where this layer is happening. So I'm just going to select all my layers and press M. And you can see here, this is the problem because my mask is set to none. So I'm just going to change that to set to add. And that should fix everything. So now we just have these boxes coming on as well. And you can see something a bit weird going on with the kind of trending one. I'm not really a huge fan of that one. And I also don't like where this search bar is coming from either. We'll fix that in just a moment. So I'm just going to select my search bar. I'm going to press U to bring up my active keyframes. And you can see my anchor point on that one hasn't changed. And that's because my mask was wrong. So I'm just going to delete these start keyframes. And I'm just going to do Control, Alt, and Home. And then go back. And we'll just redo those keyframes. That can come from the bottom. And I'll just need to ease those again. Make sure they're all okay. Just in the graph editor there. Make sure they're even. Now we can do the exact same sequence layers. So it all looks a bit nicer. And again, I want to go from bottom to top. Move one frame with Control and right arrow. And then Alt and right square bracket. Just to trim everything. To Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and Sequence Layers. I'm going to press OK. And we're just going to drag that out. So now we have this thing going on, but there's too much happening on screen for me all at once. So we need to kind of prioritize what's happening. So I'm going to do this left to right because in English we read left to right. So information coming on screen left to right makes more sense. So I'm just going to select all of these main pages down at the bottom. I'm just going to drag these over to maybe around a second or just after this kind of bottom one comes in. Go to where that is. We'll move forward 2 frames of Control and right arrow. And then we'll just bring that to where that starts. So now if we press play, that feels much nicer. It feels way smoother. Your eye sees that coming in, then it sees that coming in. It makes way more sense. So next thing I want to do is just animate this text. And then it's time to kind of bring everything together. Now, I'm really not a fan of that scaling up so much. That feels like it's scaling a lot more here. There's this first header section. But it is only 125, so I'm just going to bring that down to 115 and keep that a bit more in line, and we'll see kind of how that looks. And that's feeling much nicer to me now. I think the 125 was just too much. It felt a bit out of place. So I'm just going to select all my layers with Control and A and press U, and that'll just hide all my keyframes. So let's look at animating this text, and I'm going to use range selectors for this. So I'm just going to go to my first header here, and we're going to go open up the properties. I'm going to go to animate, and we're going to animate the position. And I'm also going to the add button, property, and opacity. I'm not going to be explaining range selectors in this tutorial. I have explained them in other videos, so you can check those out if you want to dive further in. And we're just going to change the ramp on the shape here just by opening the tabs. We're just going to change that to ramp up. And I'm going to set my ease low to about 88. And I'm just going to leave my ease high at 0 for now. Maybe I'll change the position to about 25. And we'll set the opacity to 0. And then all we need to do is animate this offset up here. I'm going to set that to -100. Create a keyframe at the start here. And then we'll move forward 1 second and change that to 100. And now if we press play, we kind of have that smooth text right on. And if we want to, we could increase that position maybe up to about 40. And you can see how smooth it up. And I actually don't like it being characters. I'm going to change this to words here. And that feels a bit nicer to me. Now you can see again, we're having that thing where everything's coming on screen all at once, but that's fine. We can sort that in just a moment. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this animator here at the top, and make sure you copy the animator, not the range selector. I'm going to press Control and C, and we're just going to press Control and V and paste that to our YouTube there. And then I'm just going to go into this range selector by pressing U twice really fast. And I want to change the position on this to half because it's much smaller and half the size. So I'm going to change that to 20, and now that feels a bit nicer. Now, because this is only one word, I'm going to actually half the time and just kind of bring this keyframe back. That comes up much faster. And we might just want to tweak that. And you can see, again, we're having everything come up all at once. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delay these. So I'm going to bring these over maybe to about 2 seconds. We'll extend that one over on the subheader. We'll press play and kind of see how that looks. That feels a bit delayed for me. I think I'd like to bring this forward. Maybe the text is kind of like YouTube. When I'm reading text, I imagine to like read it out so you get a better idea of kind of like how things feel and the timing of things. So I would see all this and I go, YouTube. Start watching videos to help us build a feed you love. So I might just delay this a bit more. I kind of imagine there's a voiceover sometimes, and it just kind of works with the pacing of things. And it's always just kind of trial and error of seeing what works. And maybe one or two frames here. Very, very fine, like tweaking, but I just like to have stuff kind of right, as you can tell. It's just a thing with designers that just tend to be perfectionists and kind of want the best work. So now I actually kind of want to add some parallax to this, and there's a bit of an easier way to do it rather than kind of setting it up manually. So I'm going to use a script to do this, and it is a free script, and I'll leave a link to that in the comments below so you can pick that up. And what we're going to do is we're just going to select all of these layers. Now, the thing is, it can get a bit tricky when you're doing multiple layers, because what I'm wanting to happen is this trending box to pop out on its own. And it might get a bit funny doing it kind of in the pre-comp. So it's a kind of interesting thing with parallax is you kind of have to pick your battles. You can either group all of these in a pre-comp, or we could have each individual layer offset a bit, but just not so much that the camera goes out of whack. There's really a few considerations. I did think about pre-comping this originally, but then things that I wanted to be offset wouldn't really work as well. So what we're actually going to do is that layer should be on for a start. So let's turn that layer on. And I'm just going to select everything except the background layer. And I'm going to go to Window, and we're going to open this depth script. And again, I'll leave a link in the comments below. Now, I'm just going to set my layer spacing quite low on this, because at 1000 will just give us such huge parallax that while it will look nice in certain situations, for this, it will probably be too much when we have the camera in, because what it's going to do is every layer in this stack will be 100 pixels further back in Z space. So I'm just going to hit Disperse on this, and it will automatically parallax our scene for us and add a camera controller too. And it's made all of our layers 3D. So with this camera controller, it's very much how I like to work. I like to use nulls for this. And you can see now we get a bit of parallax, but it's nothing too crazy. It's not going to throw everything out, and I kind of much prefer that. So first of all, I actually want to animate this box in general, and I want to do it with the camera controller. Or do I? Let's just open the rotation by pressing R, and we'll kind of see. That's kind of what I'm wanting. So we'll actually just do it on the camera rotation. And we're just going to press R to bring that up on the null or the camera controller you're using. And we're just going to press the keyframe button, and I'm going to move that over to 1 second. And I'm just going to rotate this to kind of where it feels right. So I just want this to be just poking off screen, maybe somewhere here. I'm going to select both them keyframes, press F9. And then we're going to, just in the speed graph, just make the same curve as what we already have. And if I press play, we have that kind of shoot up and look really nice. Now, I'm actually just going to bring that off screen. I didn't like it kind of popping on. And that's feeling much nicer. And you can see we have that, and then all our buttons are coming in. Looks super nice, super clean looking. And because we've done this on the controller, I could have used the parent null, but because I've done this on the controller, everything's still animating nicely and sliding up And we have that follow through motion with this kind of nav bar coming up. So it'd be quite nice just to add a subtle zoom into this as well. So on my camera controller, I'm just going to press P. And on the position here, I'm actually going to separate these dimensions. So I've just right clicked the position there and separate dimensions. And on the Z position, I'm going to go ahead and create a keyframe. And I'm going to move forward maybe to about 5 seconds. And we'll just zoom in a touch. And you can see this parallax coming into action here. And what's happening with that back box. And the text looks nice. I don't like what's happening with that back box there. So let's zoom in a bit. And we have this kind of motion now. And I'm going to leave those as linear keyframes. Kind of like just a subtle zoom. And I'm just going to fix this box here. Okay, so I figured out the problem. It was quite an interesting one, but this is kind of the trade-offs with parallax. So what actually happened is my main box stroke was set back, and that was causing issues. So I unparented that from the main box, and I've just copied the position of the main box and pasted that to the main box stroke. And then this navbar base that I made was actually too small. So I've just had to size that up on the scale manually because it wasn't letting me convert the path for some reason either. Some really weird After Effects bugs. But that seemed to have fixed the issue. So let's continue as normal. And you can see this is still happening a little bit. But the issue is this navbar base. And probably with my masks too that I've created on these layers. If I go into this mask, what I would need to do is trim each mask down a little bit more. And you can see that that's the issue. So my masks on all these layers kind of overlapping into that stroke layer. So I would actually need to select all of these and select all the mask paths and just drag each kind of path over to fix the issue. Now, I really kind of was hoping to avoid doing all of this, but it's a quick 2-second job, so I'll just take care of it now, and then we don't have to worry. And now we have a nice little box again. So we have this nice little rotation, we have some nice parallax going on, so let's add a little extra to this, and I want to bring this trending button out. So about 4 seconds in, I'm just going to select this trending layer with the mask. I'm just going to press P on my keyboard. And I'm going to press Shift and S as well. And I'm just going to create keyframes on both of those. And we'll move forward about 20 frames. So I'll do Control, Shift, and right arrow twice. And then I'm just going to bring this to the center of my screen. So I'm going to bring up my proportional grid here by pressing this button. And I want to just drag this down to kind of the center of my layer here. And we need to push the Z scale forward too. So let's bring this forward in Z. So it becomes way more center. And you can see this weird mouse issue going on. So let's set that to kind of 1,000. Maybe we don't even need the scale in this instance. I can set that to 0 and it'll bring it forward. We could even go -500 and I'll just shift it up again. On the Y, we'll get this kind of central, kind of like we've got a product on display and an important button is popping out. That's kind of the idea behind this one. So I'm just going to select both of those, go into my graph editor, and I just want to kind of ease that first one out and just adjust the easing on the end there. So we have that kind of move, which looks really nice. Now, obviously, because this is just a screenshot and a raster image, it is beginning to pixelate, so that's something to note. But if you're doing like a product animation or something like that, you would ideally have the Illustrator file, so you wouldn't need to worry about that. Now, we have this, and it's all looking really nice, but we can make it better because this doesn't really stand out, and we can add a few extra touches to really kind of bring this to life. So first of all, let's look at blurring everything but this layer. So when this layer comes out, we can kind of see everything below it. So I'm actually going to take this layer and bring it to the top here. And I'm just going to add an adjustment layer below it with Control, Alt, and Y. And then I'm going to add an effect using FX Console. And this is a free plugin. And I'm going to add the camera lens blur. And when this pops out, I want everything to be blurred behind it. You can see what's kind of going on already. Might just set the blur to like 3 or 4 maybe. It doesn't need to be much. Maybe we'll even go to 4. And I'm just going to keyframe that, press U, so I can see where that keyframe is, and move it to the end movement. And then at the start, we'll just set that to 0. Now, I could have used a blur map and get into alpha maps and stuff, but this is really the easiest way when we're only dealing with one layer. And I'm going to select both of these easings on this and just copy that with ease copy, which again is another free script. And I'm just going to paste that to my keyframes there. And I might just bring this up in wire touch. And now we have that kind of motion where everything looks nice and zooms out and blurs at the same time. Now I could just fix my mask on this layer so it's a bit more even when this button pops out, which is slightly annoying to me. And I want to darken everything behind when this trending button comes on again, kind of like this is an important piece of information on a website or something. So I'm just going to do FX console again, and we're just going to simply add a brightness and contrast. And again, I'm just going to add a keyframe to the brightness, move forward in time, and then all I'm going to do is just dip the brightness down on that adjustment layer. And maybe we'll go all the way down, why not? And then again, I'll press U and just paste on that same easing. So we kind of have that soloing out and looking way more interesting, and you can actually kind of see what's going on screen. So let's also add another effect to this, and we're going to add the drop shadow effect. And this time I'm going to set it up kind of how I want it. Let's just turn these grids off here. And I might just increase the distance a touch, increase the softness. I've just realized I've added it to the wrong layer, which is why I can't see it. So I'm just going to do Control and X on that, paste it to my actual button here. And we'll go back to kind of at the end here. And I'll increase the distance. You can see it now. We'll increase the softness a touch. And it's going to be very subtle. Let's maybe increase the opacity to kind of like 80. Increase the softness. Too much, maybe like 5 pixels. Just to soften it a tad. And then we'll keyframe this as well. So we'll keyframe the opacity on this one. And at the start, we'll just set that to 0. Press U. And I'll just paste that easing on as well. We have that come up. And that's looking way better. Might just soften that a touch more. To like 8. And we kind of have this animation coming on. Now, one final couple touch that I want to add is, of course, some glows. So let's call this adjustment layer blur. And then we'll add another adjustment layer with Control, Alt, and Y. And we'll call this glow. Make sure everything is organized and labeled. So we'll just add the glow effect to this. And you can see that's quite a lot. Let's maybe increase the threshold to about 80%. Maybe even go 90. I want this quite minimal to this first instance. And I might just set that to kind of like 0.8 or something. I don't want to overdo it. If you do have something like deep glow or something, you can make life easier by using something like that. But I'm also just going to dupe that with Control and D. And we're going to reduce the threshold to kind of like 60. Increase the radius to about 30 or something. And we'll drop the intensity quite a lot to like 0.2. And on this one, I might just lower the radius to like 5. And you can kind of see it's quite subtle, but adding that extra blurring underneath really helps. And we can do that again and reduce the threshold some more, increase the radius to 60, and then drop the intensity some more to like 0.1. So now we have this really glowy look, and it just adds a little something to our animation. Now, one kind of final thing is just taking care of this gradient in the background here, and we can animate this into and make it look a bit nicer. So on the background here, I'm actually just going to right-click that, go to Layer Styles, and we're going to add a gradient overlay. And I'm just going to turn that off for the moment. Go to my gradient overlay here, go to Edit Gradient, and select my first stop, and we'll just use eyedropper to select that bright red. And on the top, we'll select this kind of dark bluey color. And doing this by turning it back on looks very similar. But what it's going to do is just allow me to animate the gradient on this. So we can kind of offset that and have this gradient swipe in when the camera swipes in, or have it kind of move up over time. So on my camera controller, I'm going to press U so I can kind of see where everything's moving. Go to the end here. And that needs bringing down in the offset because it's kind of like quite high at the moment. We could probably just increase the scale so it softens out a bit. And maybe reduce that a bit more. Somewhere there. And I'm just going to keyframe the offset. And I'm going to go back to the start. And I'm just going to drop the offset down. And I'll go to where this is on the rotation on the camera. And we'll copy those easing values and paste that down to our gradient. It's very subtle, but we have this kind of gradient move up. And it's very subtle, but again, it's just a little extra element to kind of add in. And if we want to, we can go to the end here, and you could kind of offset this up a bit more, kind of have like this gradient rising up. And then one final thing that you might like to do with this camera controller is adding a match cut to your next scene. So we can set that up very simply, have that kind of pop up, and I'd just drag this keyframe over a touch, and then I'd move forward in time a little bit. And on the X position, we're just going to add 2 more keyframes, and on the second one, all I'd do is swipe that over, kind of like this. Now you could either swipe all the way, or you could do a match cut here. And I'll just select both of those, and I'll bring them out massively. So if we're going to do a match cut, it would be right on the peak there. And all I'd need to do is select all of those and trim my layer with Alt and right square bracket. And I'll just bring that back one, and I'll leave the background on. And then we kind of need some follow through animation, but you kind of get the gist. If I was to press play, we have all this pop on, really nice, really smooth. We have that subtle camera motion, blending button comes in, and then we'd match cut over. If you don't want to match cut, you could just slide this off and it would look pretty nice. Now, the match cut didn't work there because we didn't have the follow through, but you kind of get the idea of where I'm going. Now, if you did like this video, I'm sure you'll want to learn more After Effects by watching this one next. So go ahead and stick with me for some more After Effects learning.